Johnny Carson revealed the 9 Golden Age guests he loved the most. For 30 years, Johnny Carson invited America into his late-night living room. As host of The Tonight Show, he interviewed over 22,000 guests, from nervous newcomers to Hollywood legends. But among those thousands, Carson privately maintained a much shorter list, the rare guests who didn't just perform for his audience, but genuinely connected with the man behind the desk. Johnny was the ultimate professional, explained a former Tonight Show producer who worked with Carson for 15 years. But there were certain guests who could make him forget the cameras were rolling. When they visited, Johnny wasn't hosting anymore. He was simply enjoying himself. But first, we need to understand why the man at the top of Carson's list earned his deepest admiration, and the emotional moment that revealed just how genuine their connection truly was.
Now, the title of it is Bo. That's the name of the dog.
Jimmy Stewart, the man who made Carson cry. When Jimmy Stewart appeared on The Tonight Show, viewers witnessed something remarkable. Johnny Carson, television's unflappable master of ceremonies, transformed into an appreciative fan in the presence of genuine Hollywood royalty. Jimmy was everything America wanted to believe about itself, Carson once confided to a close friend. Decent, humble, authentic, the real deal in an industry full of phonies. Stewart's appearances became annual events, eagerly anticipated by both the audience and Carson himself. Unlike many aging stars who relied on well-rehearsed anecdotes, Stewart brought a natural, sometimes hesitant quality to his interviews that Carson found refreshingly authentic. Johnny respected that Jimmy never tried to be slick, explained a former Tonight Show producer. He stumbled over words sometimes. He paused to find the right expression. He was just being himself, not performing Jimmy Stewart the way some celebrities would perform versions of themselves. What truly cemented Stewart's place as Carson's favorite guest was a now legendary 1981 appearance when the actor read his poem, Bo, about the death of his beloved dog. The simple, heartfelt verses about his golden retriever caused Carson, famous for his emotional restraint, to visibly tear up on national television. "I've never seen Johnny react that way to anything," recalled a camera operator who was present that night. "He was genuinely moved, and he didn't try to hide it or make a joke to break the tension. He just let himself have that human moment with Jimmy in the audience." After that appearance, Stewart's status was sealed. Carson's staff knew that when Stewart was booked, their normally exacting boss would be in his most generous mood. "Johnny would actually ask us to extend Jimmy's segments if possible," revealed a former producer. He'd say, "See if we can give him another few minutes. Move the commercial if you have to." That kind of scheduling change was practically unheard of. Perhaps most telling was how Carson spoke about Stewart when cameras weren't rolling. According to those who worked closely with him, Carson would sometimes reference Stewart's interviews during production meetings as examples of perfect television, authentic moments that justified the medium's existence. On the night of Carson's final show in 1992, Stewart was one of the few celebrities he personally called to thank, a gesture that spoke volumes about the genuine connection between television's most guarded host and Hollywood's most authentic star. While Stewart represented the dignified, emotional side of Carson's ideal guest, his next favorite brought something entirely different, a mastery of timing that matched Carson's own.
Make him feel welcome. Let's meet and greet Bob Newhart.
Bob Newhart, the comic who made it look effortless. If Jimmy Stewart touched Carson's heart, Bob Newhart connected with his comedic mind. The stand-up comedian turned sitcom star shared Carson's dry wit, perfect timing, and ability to find humor in life's mundane moments. "Johnny once called Bob the most effortlessly funny man I know," revealed a writer who worked on The Tonight Show during the 1970s and 80s. Coming from Carson, there was no higher compliment. What distinguished Newhart from other comedians who appeared on the show was his conversational style. Rather than arriving with prepared bits or recycled material from his act, Newhart engaged in genuine dialogue with Carson, the approach that perfectly complemented the host's own strengths. "They had this incredible timing between them," recalled a director who worked on many of Newhart's appearances. Bob would start a story, Johnny would add just the right comment at just the right moment, Bob would build on it. It was like watching two jazz musicians who could anticipate each other's moves perfectly. Carson's appreciation for Newhart was evident in how he broke his own rules when the comedian appeared. Normally strict about keeping segments to their allotted time, Carson would frequently let Newhart run long, sometimes even asking producers to extend his segments at the expense of other guests. If Bob was on a roll, Johnny would just let him go, confirmed a former producer. He'd make the stretch it sign to the control room, which was his signal to delay the commercial break. With most guests, he'd be counting down the seconds until they were done. With Bob, he never wanted it to end. What Carson particularly appreciated about Newhart was his humility. Despite his enormous success, Newhart never arrived with an entourage or special demands. He treated crew members with respect and seemed genuinely grateful for the opportunity to appear on the show. Johnny couldn't stand prima donnas, explained the producer. Bob was the opposite. He'd chat with the pages, thank the makeup people, remember the names of camera operators he'd met years earlier. Johnny noticed those things. Their professional relationship eventually evolved into a genuine friendship, with the two men occasionally golfing together, a clear indication that Carson, famous for keeping his private life separate from his professional world, truly enjoyed Newhart's company. If Johnny invited you to play golf, that meant he actually liked you as a person, not just as a guest, noted a longtime friend of Carson's. Bob was one of the very few celebrities who crossed that line. While Newhart represented the subtle intellectual comedy Carson admired, his next favorite guest brought something entirely different: spontaneity and unpredictability that kept Carson on his toes.
Would you welcome Burt Reynolds?
Burt Reynolds, the perfect partner in crime. When Burt Reynolds appeared on The Tonight Show, viewers knew they weren't just watching an interview, they were witnessing a friendly competition between two men who genuinely enjoyed trying to one-up each other. Burt gets the game. Most guests don't, Carson reportedly told a producer after a particularly memorable appearance by the mustachioed movie star. Reynolds, at the height of his fame in the 1970s, understood something crucial about television that many other celebrities missed: that the host-guest relationship worked best as a playful partnership rather than simply a promotional opportunity. Johnny loved that Burt came to play, not just to plug a movie, explained a former Tonight Show writer. Most stars arrived with talking points from their publicists. Burt arrived with water pistols hidden in his jacket. Their legendary prank wars became a recurring highlight of Reynolds' appearances. In one infamous incident, Reynolds surprised Carson by hitting him in the face with shaving cream during what was supposed to be a serious discussion about an upcoming film. Rather than being annoyed, Carson was delighted by the ambush. According to staff members present, he laughed harder off camera than he did for the audience, genuinely appreciating Reynolds' willingness to shake up the normally predictable talk show format. Johnny loved surprise, real surprise, not the fake "I didn't expect that" question moments most celebrities rehearse, noted a director who worked on many of Reynolds' appearances. Burt was one of the few guests who could genuinely catch Johnny off guard, and Johnny respected that enormously. What Carson particularly appreciated was Reynolds' ability to take a joke as well as dish one out. When Carson would make quips about Reynolds' failed movies or his high-profile romantic relationships, the actor would laugh along genuinely rather than showing the thin-skinned sensitivity common among Hollywood stars. Johnny had a test for whether he truly liked a celebrity, revealed a longtime producer. Could he tease them without them getting offended? Burt passed that test with flying colors. He not only took the jokes well, he encouraged them. The genuine friendship between the two men was evident in how Carson spoke about Reynolds when the actor wasn't on the show. According to staff members, Carson would often reference Reynolds' prior appearances when preparing for other guests, using him as an example of ideal talk show behavior. Johnny would tell nervous guests, "Just relax and have fun with it, like Burt Reynolds does," recalled a talent coordinator who worked on the show. That was the highest praise he could offer. While Reynolds represented the playful, unpredictable energy Carson enjoyed, his next favorite guest brought something entirely different: intellectual depth that allowed Carson to show a side of himself rarely seen on television.
We'd been on the same stage together and no harm had come to you.
That is true. That is no harm. And I was. And then you were on that show.
Orson Welles, the genius who fascinated Carson. When most people think of Johnny Carson, they picture the affable, joke-cracking host who specialized in celebrity interviews and comedy sketches. But those who knew Carson well understood he had a deeply intellectual side, one that emerged most clearly when Orson Welles appeared on The Tonight Show. Johnny was genuinely in awe of Orson, revealed a producer who worked on several of Welles' appearances. Not starstruck like he sometimes seemed with Jimmy Stewart, but intellectually fascinated. When Orson was scheduled, Johnny would actually read up on subjects he thought might come up: history, literature, theater, He never did that for other guests. What made Wells different from Carson's other favorites was the nature of their conversations. Rather than focusing on Hollywood gossip or promotional chatter, their discussions veered into art, politics, magic, and history, revealing depths to Carson that surprised even longtime viewers. Those interviews showed the Johnny that his friends knew but the public rarely saw, explained a writer who worked closely with Carson. Well-read, curious about the world, capable of discussing Shakespeare as easily as he could tell a joke about a giraffe. One of the most memorable Wells appearances featured the legendary director performing magic tricks live on air, complex illusions that genuinely stunned the crew and delighted Carson, who had a lifelong interest in magic. Johnny's face during those tricks was priceless, recalled a camera operator. He was like a kid at a magic show, completely caught up in the wonder of it. After one particularly impressive illusion, Johnny turned to the camera during the commercial break and said, "Did you folks at home see that? That was real magic, not TV magic." What Carson particularly appreciated about Wells was his authenticity. Despite his towering reputation as one of cinema's greatest directors, Wells would discuss his failures as openly as his successes, a candor that Carson found refreshing in an industry built on carefully maintained images. Orson would talk about getting fired from movies or having projects canceled without any of the usual Hollywood spin, noted a producer. Johnny respected that honesty enormously. He hated when celebrities tried to pretend everything they touched turned to gold. While their conversations sometimes became so involved that they challenged the light entertainment format of The Tonight Show, Carson never rushed Wells or tried to steer him toward more accessible topics. Instead, he seemed to relish the opportunity to engage on a different level than his usual interviews allowed. Johnny once told me those conversations with Orson were some of the most satisfying moments of his career, revealed a friend of Carson's. He said, "For a few minutes, I get to be myself rather than Johnny Carson, if that makes any sense." While Wells represented the intellectual stimulation Carson craved, his next favorite guest embodied something equally important to the host, the comedy tradition that shaped his own career.
Legend. Would you welcome, please, Jack Benny?
Jack Benny, the master who inspired Carson. When Jack Benny appeared on The Tonight Show, viewers witnessed a rare reversal of Carson's usual demeanor. The normally composed, controlling host transformed into an appreciative student in the presence of one of comedy's greatest pioneers. "He was the reason I do what I do," Carson once admitted to a close colleague after a Benny appearance. "Watching him was my masterclass in comedy." Benny's influence on Carson's style was evident to anyone familiar with both men's work. The perfect timing, the subtle reactions, the ability to get laughs with just a look or a pause, all hallmarks of Benny's approach that Carson had studied and adapted for his own performances. "Johnny's entire comedic philosophy came from Jack," explained a writer who worked with Carson during the 1970s. "The idea that the host didn't need to dominate with punchlines, that reactions could be funnier than actions, that silence could get bigger laughs than words, that was pure Benny, and Johnny knew it." When Benny visited The Tonight Show, Carson's admiration was palpable. He would laugh more genuinely, listen more attentively, and show a deference rarely seen with other guests. According to staff members, Carson would even change the physical setup of the interviews, positioning himself to give Benny the optimal camera angles. Johnny would actually tell the directors, "Make sure you get Jack's reactions, not mine," recalled a former producer. That was unheard of, Carson literally directing attention away from himself to showcase someone else. It showed how much he respected Benny's mastery. What made these appearances particularly special was the generational torch passing they represented. Benny, born in 1894, had pioneered radio comedy when Carson was just a child. By the time Benny appeared on The Tonight Show in the 1970s, he was in his late 70s and early 80s, yet his timing remained impeccable. Watching Johnny interact with Jack was like seeing comedy history in real time, noted a director who worked on several of Benny's appearances. Here was the current king of late night, talking with the man who had essentially invented the formula decades earlier. Johnny never forgot that lineage. Carson's respect for Benny extended far beyond their on-air interactions. According to those close to Carson, he kept a framed photo of Benny in his office, the only celebrity picture he displayed in his private workspace. "That photo said everything about who Johnny admired most," explained a longtime friend. "Not the biggest stars of the moment or even his own image, but the man who had shown him what television comedy could be at its best. While Benny represented Carson's comedy lineage, his next favorite guest brought something equally valuable, authentic warmth that made every appearance feel like a genuine reunion rather than a professional obligation.
It can't be possible that it was 1967 when Harvey, Vicki, Lyle, and I stepped on this stage for the first time.
Carol Burnett, the guest who brought sunshine. When Carol Burnett appeared on The Tonight Show, something remarkable happened. Johnny Carson, television's most controlled performer, would visibly relax. His shoulders would loosen, his smile would widen, and the invisible barrier he typically maintained between himself and his guests would momentarily disappear. Carol brings sunshine to the stage, Carson reportedly told Ed McMahon after one of Burnett's many appearances. What distinguished Burnett from other regular guests was the natural chemistry she shared with Carson. Unlike the slightly formal rhythm of most Tonight Show interviews, their conversations flowed with the easy familiarity of old friends catching up. With most guests, Johnny was clearly the host and they were clearly the visitor, explained a director who worked on many of Burnett's appearances. With Carol, it felt like two equals, just enjoying each other's company. The audience could sense that difference immediately. Burnett was one of the few performers Carson allowed to go completely off script during appearances. While most celebrities were gently guided through predetermined talking points, Burnett was given free rein to follow conversational tangents, initiate impromptu games, or even turn the tables and begin interviewing Carson himself. Johnny trusted Carol completely, noted a former producer. He knew she understood television timing as well as he did, that she would never embarrass him or the show, and most importantly, that whatever spontaneous direction she took would be entertaining. That level of trust was incredibly rare. What Carson particularly appreciated about Burnett was her complete lack of pretension. Despite her enormous success with The Carol Burnett Show, she arrived at The Tonight Show with minimal entourage, no special demands, and genuine appreciation for the crew members who made the production possible. Carol would remember the names of camera operators and makeup artists she'd met years earlier, recalled a longtime staff member. She'd ask about their families and actually listen to the answers. Johnny noticed those things and valued them enormously. The genuine affection between them was evident in how Carson broke his own rules when Burnett appeared. Typically strict about keeping segments to their allocated time, he would frequently extend her appearances, sometimes even bumping other guests to give her more airtime. When the producer would signal that it was time to wrap up, Johnny would sometimes just wave them off if Carol was in the middle of a good story, explained a former director. That almost never happened with other guests, no matter how famous they were. Perhaps the most telling evidence of Carson's fondness for Burnett was how frequently he mentioned her when she wasn't on the show. According to staff members, Carson would often reference Burnett's previous appearances when preparing for other guests, using her as the gold standard for talk show behavior. While Burnett brought warmth and spontaneity that Carson treasured, his next favorite guest offered something equally valuable: authentic masculinity without the Hollywood pretense.
Never another series, and here you are back with a weekly series.
Yeah, well, I thought I could play golf every day. It gets...
James Garner, what a movie star should be. When James Garner settled into the Tonight Show couch, viewers witnessed a rare type of celebrity interview, one that felt like eavesdropping on two regular guys talking, rather than a promotional appearance by a movie star. He's what a movie star should be, and most aren't, Johnny quipped to a producer after one of Garner's many appearances. What Carson appreciated most about Garner was his complete authenticity. Unlike many Hollywood leading men who seemed to be performing even when the cameras weren't rolling, Garner brought a natural, unpretentious quality to his Tonight Show visits that Carson found refreshing. Johnny could spot a phony from a mile away, explained a talent coordinator who worked on the show for many years. James was the opposite of phony. What you saw was exactly what you got, whether cameras were rolling or not. Garner's stories about Hollywood had a distinctively grounded quality. When he talked about making The Great Escape or his experiences on Maverick, he focused on the human moments rather than self-aggrandizing tales, the practical jokes between takes, the friendships formed with crew members, the mistakes and mishaps that rarely made it into official Hollywood narratives. James talked about being a movie star the way most people talk about their office jobs, noted a writer who worked on several of Garner's appearances. He'd describe Steve McQueen throwing a tantrum the same way someone might talk about a difficult coworker, with a mix of affection and exasperation, but no reverence whatsoever. This down-to-earth quality extended to how Garner handled himself off-camera as well, According to numerous staff accounts, he arrived with minimal entourage, made a point of thanking crew members, and treated everyone from the pages to the producers with the same respectful attention. Johnny valued that kind of behavior more than most people realized, revealed a longtime producer. He paid close attention to how guests treated the staff when they thought no one important was watching. James passed that test with flying colors every time. What made Garner particularly special among Carson's favorites was how he bridged different worlds. He could tell stories about Hollywood legends that fascinated Carson's older viewers while maintaining an approachable modern sensibility that appealed to younger audience members. James had worked with everyone from Marlon Brando to Julie Andrews, but he never name-dropped or acted impressed with himself, the producer continued. Johnny loved that he could reference old Hollywood without sounding like he was stuck in the past. The genuine friendship between the two men was evident in their on-air comfort with each other. Carson, typically careful to maintain some professional distance with guests, would occasionally reference private conversations or shared experiences with Garner, a rare breach of the wall he usually maintained between his public and private lives. While Garner represented unpretentious authenticity that Carson valued, his next favorite guest brought something equally precious, living history that connected Carson to comedy's golden age.
This is my 10th or 11th cigar. I smoke between 15 and 20 cigars a day. Yeah.
George Burns, the legend who kept getting better. When George Burns appeared on The Tonight Show, particularly in his later years, viewers witnessed something extraordinary. Johnny Carson, television's unquestioned king, treating his guest with the deference normally reserved for visiting royalty. At 80, 90, and eventually over 100 years old, Burns represented something Carson deeply respected: longevity in a notoriously fickle business, and the living connection to vaudeville, the entertainment tradition that had shaped Carson's own comedic sensibilities. Johnny would actually get nervous before George's appearances, revealed a producer who worked on several of Burns' visits to the show. Not because he was worried about the interview going badly, but because he had such enormous respect for George's place in comedy history. It was like watching a concert pianist prepare to play for Mozart. What made Burns unique among Carson's favorites was how he improved with age. While many older performers relied on recycling past glories, Burns continued to evolve his act well into his 90s, bringing fresh material and sharp observations to each appearance. Johnny used to say that George was the only person in Hollywood who got funnier as he got older, recalled a writer who worked on The Tonight Show during the 1980s. He'd say, "Most of us peak and then hang on. George just keeps climbing." Carson's respect was evident in how he conducted these interviews, typically the master of his domain, who gently guided conversations where he wanted them to go. With Burns, Carson would often simply ask a question and then lean back, giving the comedy legend complete control of the segment. Johnny would sometimes go 2 or 3 minutes without saying anything when George was on a roll, noted a director who worked on many of Burns' appearances. For Carson, who typically jumped in every 30 seconds with most guests, that was extraordinary. He knew great comedy when he saw it, and he wasn't going to interrupt it. Burns himself recognized the special treatment he received. In his autobiography, he wrote, "If Johnny Carson likes you, you're bulletproof in this business. And for some reason I can't explain, Johnny always liked me." The reason, according to those who knew Carson well, was simple. Burns embodied the professionalism, timing, and dedication to craft that Carson valued above all else. George never missed a beat, never flubbed a punchline, never forgot where he was going with a story, explained a longtime producer. Johnny, who prided himself on those same qualities, saw Burns as the ultimate example of what a comedian should be, someone who made incredibly difficult work look effortless. Perhaps most telling was how Carson treated Burns during commercial breaks. According to crew members, Carson, who typically used these moments to confer with producers or prepare for the next segment, would remain fully engaged with Burns when the cameras weren't rolling, often asking him questions about performers from the 1920s and 30s who had influenced Carson's own development. Johnny was getting a private masterclass in comedy history during those breaks, noted a camera operator who witnessed many of these interactions, and he treasured every minute of it. While Burns connected Carson to comedy's roots, his final favorite guest represented something equally significant: female comedy pioneering that paralleled Carson's own television innovations.
He's a fine pro. I like pros.
Yeah.
I like pros that show up.
Lucille Ball, television royalty. When Lucille Ball appeared on The Tonight Show, two television pioneers shared the stage. each having transformed the medium in their own way. While Carson had reinvented late-night television, Ball had revolutionized the sitcom format a generation earlier. "She's royalty," Carson told his audience during Ball's appearance on his 10th anniversary special, a rare moment when he openly acknowledged his admiration for a guest. What made Ball's appearances special wasn't just her comedic talents, though those remained sharp throughout her career, but the mutual respect evident between two performers who understood the challenges of television better than perhaps anyone else in the industry. "They both knew what it meant to carry a show, week after week, year after year," explained a producer who worked with both stars at different points in his career. "They'd both felt the pressure of millions of people tuning in expecting to be entertained. That created a bond that was obvious whenever they were together." Carson, normally careful to maintain his position as the center of The Tonight Show, would visibly defer to Ball during her appearances, giving her the best camera angles, laughing genuinely at her jokes, and showing a warmth that went beyond his usual professional courtesy. "Johnny treated Lucy like the queen of television, which in many ways she was," recalled a director who worked on several of Ball's appearances. He would actually tell the camera operators before the show, "Make sure you get her reactions, not just mine." That was practically unheard of. One of the most touching moments between them came during a 1973 appearance when Carson surprised Ball with footage from her earliest screen test, material she hadn't seen in decades. According to those present, Ball was visibly moved, briefly tearing up before recovering with a characteristic quip. "That moment revealed so much about their relationship," noted a former Tonight Show writer. "Johnny knew exactly what would touch her without being exploitative, and Lucy trusted him enough to show genuine emotion rather than just her polished public persona." What Carson particularly appreciated about Ball was her pioneering role as a businesswoman in an industry dominated by men. As the first female head of a major television studio, Ball had broken barriers that Carson, who formed his own production company, deeply respected. "Johnny once told me that Lucy was the smartest person in television, not just the funniest woman, but the smartest person, period," revealed a friend who knew both stars. He admired how she had navigated Hollywood as both a performer and an executive when women weren't supposed to be either. The genuine affection between them was evident in how Carson broke his own rules when Ball appeared. Typically strict about keeping segments to their allocated time, he would frequently extend her appearances, sometimes even bumping other guests to give her more airtime. When the producer would signal that it was time to wrap up, Johnny would sometimes just wave them off if Lucy was in the middle of a good story, explained a former director. That almost never happened with other guests, no matter how famous they were. Perhaps most telling was how Carson spoke about Ball when she wasn't on the show. According to staff members, Carson would often reference her when discussing the challenges of television with other guests, citing her work ethic and resilience as models for the industry. "Lucy represented everything Johnny valued in a performer," explained a longtime producer. "Talent without pretension, success without arrogance, and most importantly, the understanding that television was both an art form and a business, and you had to master both sides to truly succeed."